Gaelic J as Gael Narach.
As Bavilem Shuashaltica, Gus a Claare Shaw, Claare Gael. Hello and welcome to the programme Claare Gael. I'm Robert Gutting Carswell, Robert Carslach, Owl Bobby Bob. And in this bilingual programme, you'll hear part of it in the English language as Sir Claare Hingach Shaw, Nishu Clash and Pertelia, Sir Hilg. And in this bilingual programme, you'll also hear another part of it in the Manx Gaelic, Chinyan Amera, the mother tongue of Alien Vanning, the Isle of Man. As Bannachten Dew. In the chapter dealing with Castletown, David Robertson says he's going to be dealing with the misfortunes of the Countess of Derby. So we're in historical mode because, although he's writing of his tour in 1791, he's describing actions from 140 years before. Wel gynnys da Mina Harker ten carach Lucy Westenra on stayed Fuoch, as ten voirek kaart en edden best hanne. Da Mina skriuris Lucy lug burn al jouwer as femeg Mina engel de gorlesh dunje shesha Jonathan back by Budapest lug chingis jouwer quech Ginowersen. Now we'll be starting and ending with Scottish Gaelic trio SIAN this time. My Love Was Here, van my leannan naun. Tashu geestjach rish radio vanning, stashu dan ashun, viskuller skelje was doelish ellen vanning.
Get hami moners na glanaf, chanil mo hundrish na ferf. Gunduk mi ma vod smogialig, nach dian in mo jaune geel. Gusum fein heen your shalig, mo geestje shalager na jale. Vamolianan now, vamolianan, boyach parailian savannah town. Chatian mi shit en egal, gebek ho hi kamerad. Hamogun het life se haast, ook een ichestische kaal. Wat gunne, wat skeef, wat geleef, oer geilen das en tawel. Vamolianan now, vamolianan, boyach parailian se valat hau. Marun mach na mnasleji chumig se gooi gelenje. Gerege schiet er verling, bevor merap sas de life revig. Bearlem kuntjian in piastrede, schatjian mishen kula mega. Vamolianan now, vamolianan, boyach parailian se valat hau. Hamochian a shethken saicher, garam hule vjalig na meitjen. Krieg roer hul na saiche, lavi ese volig na boichen. Maar ruft de gatslin in eiche, schatel mi gembeeg dum feilig al. Vamolianan now, vamolianan, boyach parailian se valat hau. Galig nilig an vøye, gait de her orste mugge. Lekker geroek ach woord juwel, lefer ars na kroike te je. Hier ik se jarnige verroeg, gerig kalf ben je na speduwer. Waar mar unwittingly var reiren jelan kille bial jacher gori village gav me mo het selinje suk der mohulen schille kumes lang kunjian chile vamos leannan boyach baraljan sevalatau vamos leannan boyach baraljan sevalatau.
And that's the trio of Caitlin Lilly, Ailey Cormac and Ellen MacDonald, collectively SIAN, A Storm or The Elements, and we'll hear from them later. We embark on this piece, which even to David Robertson, writing in the 1790s, was an historic event of over 100 years earlier. After the decollation of James, the 7th Earl of Derby, he writes, and even here we have to pause because decollation is perhaps not widely used. Decollation is the act of beheading someone, which is perhaps why it's not so widely used. And this happened to James Stanley and Stanlachmoor, the 7th Earl of Derby, in Bolton in 1651. James and his wife's cousin, Prince Rupert, had attacked the parliamentarians in what the parliamentarians described as the Bolton Massacre in 1644. When James Stanley was later captured, Oliver Cromwell's instruction to Colonel Rich of Liverpool was that Stanley should be tried in Chester and executed in Bolton. The trial was a sham, a foregone conclusion, and Cromwell's choice of Bolton was an act of reprisal. However, in other ways, perhaps not the apposite choice for the execution of James Stanley. Tammy terug skån vis femer inch dat jij ons reiche redden as ons ferres tai. To Jonathan as Mijntje Hawkins terug fijn lei. Son nish terwijl Jonathan the Fartius, to Mijntje Hawkins geri inch de uljumach on de clienten. Krein achter de voir wiengol. Salium de vodum gol suskas of aliorischlein a gael shilje ortween. Ach, jost ou gol fos, les huist reunoem. As de Jonathan ons fame je kerel fos. Te gol toyach de kur pert de eiler na krauweneggerish. Ach, ve jint fest de haglach liorische chingus ljouwer. Hier nish na kuurten, te moest de wijn gaadlegge. Ons zacht ol tajem. As te doeste zee oljewe krauw, der a fodden brege en groene gaadjenegge. Ach, buiste gee, ten a keerten shaw chit de wijn a san wenke. Gauws den alleen gul sha, as ons tre nie het leier soel de bollach. Tammy tre stijl. As nish de wel meer ninch tut na naich den em, liek dou braich jeed shen heads. Now, we've had a version of this little song before. Here it's sung in another version by the trio PLETHYN.
Fuoch I rioed yn morio, wel do mewn pader ffrio, wrthodd y gwynt fi'r eil o man, a dyna lle bim i'n crio. Bachgen dad I Dafydd, yn gwisgo I sgidiau newydd, cadw'r hen rai tan yr haf, bachgen dad I Dafydd. Mae gen I fiwch yn pori, a llwyr clamelenni, mae'r ddau yn ddi heb un o'i bath, ond gwyn yw'r llaeth ser hynny. Fuoch I rioed yn morio, wel do mewn pader ffrio, chwythodd y gwynt i'r eil o man, a dyna lle bim i'n crio.
Fuoch I rioed yn morio. Were you ever sailing? Well, yes, in a frying pan. The wind blew me to the Isle of Man, and that's where I was crying. PLETHYN with that version of it. Cwn ni yw pwsa, as cred, as quai ni cwlina banish, as cre ni yw ciaw, as be banish rosh a tia na frifejach fyson. Inch da ulju mychion ec fin, inch da ulju mychion ulju, no na vel veg je sim Dutch, nach be na ni min dus. To Jonathan braiach da de chordot, churramaramach egge. Ach liam na wel shen maid a lure vain fartius sage en cholok scanchoil Hawkins as Harker, As ma saw fair ta wus cor grai daw, as da eschen cor grai orm, as ta mi cor grai duts lesh de chulju vod as emscher a breer, ta mi cor duts inrichen a grai egge, ons in a jay shen. Sled ned ma Lucy smooveen, as de chulju vanach dort. Liats, Mina Harker. Tourustel. Vai Patrick Hennessy, MD, MRCS, LKQ, CPI, etc., Gus John Seward, MD, and Fido Lem ein Fowr. Mawunya Wujel, rare na yeri in jou, Tammy Cor Tourustel, J. Staden, the Chuljurid Fagage for Machurum. Now, the Stanleys had been preeminent in Lancashire, and Latham House itself was about 20 miles from Bolton. Peter Draper of Ormskirk published a book in 1864 about the House of Stanley. And he writes that, somewhat contrary to the fond expectations of the Earl's enemies, the sympathy of the public was strongly manifested in his favour, as indeed it had been throughout the solemn journey. And here he quotes Sir Humphrey Baggerly, who had been a prisoner in Chester, and he went as a companion with James Stanley. And he quotes him as saying, the people everywhere praying and weeping as he went even from the castle of Chester, his prison, to his scaffold at Bolton. And then Peter Draper goes on, with the diabolical view of casting further indignity upon the person of the Earl, it had been determined that the scaffold upon which he was doomed to suffer execution should be formed, for the most part, of timber conveyed from the ruins of Latham House, which resolution was actually carried into effect. Of course, Latham House, famously, the Countess had withstood the siege of Latham House, and so thereafter, when the Stanleys had left Latham House, the parliamentarians had come in and they demolished it. And that was music from Albert Healy, recording from 1944. And that was one which Albert Healy had made. He was very well known for his work in broadcasting, in fact, and he was one of the ones who made a successful transition into television. Siodiw stasiwn yn asiwn y sian dy Graeg in awrys Radio Fanning. Ond sio se Claare na Gael vis verklaasjen. Mish Robert Kutin Karswell, Robert de Karslach.
Have I heard tell of Owl Bobby Bob?
As te orm grey ag a tre sio, de wel Claare na Gael master na podcasten ter gedden, ma visu golgus inadega radio vanin as foddy u cor stiach de gedden en podcast show gus de chelven, gus de choeder de jewish, as de chen, nies through achten elia to podcasten, so de chen gedden as de master Heeden the podcasten by radio vanin. Now, Peter Draper's account continues. The dismal structure, and here he's talking about the scaffold made from wood from Latham House, was erected in front of the Man and Scythe Inn. Now, the Man and Scythe Inn was in fact a property owned by the Stanley family. On arriving at the site of the scaffold, says Draper, it was found that the erection was not completed. And, again quoting Bagley, because the people of the town refused to strike a nail or give any assistance to it, many of them saying that since the war began they'd suffered many great losses, but never so great as this. This was the greatest that ever befell them, that the Earl of Derby, their lord and patriot, should lose his life there, and in that barbarous manner. And so back to Draper. Thus finding the arrangements for the sad event in a confused state of unpreparedness, the Earl was allowed to pass the time till 3 o'clock in the afternoon with his son Lord Strange and some of his friends and servants in a chamber of the Man and Scythe Inn. Benten de Sorensach Renfield, genelweg de rij. Voor team Eljäger, as dat doch kiaull naglach jitwooi, ach, maar hagereid de heegaal, gedenkaartsen dan erbij mag aastje. Vast de Jew hij kaart erde, as de wunje, golgus a tai vollem, as de negerigen jay schiener a chelie liaus nine. A tai hugge, maar bij kunjach jouwer, ren de surrensach rijer soel de geert. Ren de Danië stappel egge jatain de vrijach jane dorriser a red, no de rauwet Ninjorian. Van mi heen Jane maag as onjig a chemer studeres goil smook lug genair, as honnig be fair jou chit nies gus a tai. Kausvigel sha onjig chemer Renfield, gauw a surrensach toiach der altune vai choustai, as hug ersen uljun a droch enman, oddig e corlesh gus a chinje. Ve maid en dunje, we Jane de vein a wunje cor de lure, inchte de kom na henje son kerchin droch engach. Well, now, music from Brittany and a single released this year by a singer from Brésil, the northern area of Brittany in Finisterre. This is MADELYN ANN, inviting us to Chom, Rest on Me.
Og floden av gustadik A gulv var ut gærjudus Og gemom nå som jal inut A genus tremenet genit Sjåmen om a etan oss Sjåmen om betin kaffe Sjåmen om Sjåmen
a singer from Cameled on the Crozon Peninsula in the Brogenève, or Cameray-sur-Mer in Cornouailles in the Frenchified version, and that was MADELYN ANN with her song in Breton, Chom, ennon, rest on me. Sen, rennen dyn iain, corn y lied yr enni spwliau, as dy raw ei gyr I gynw dynfyrus jay, as dwrt ei dy gynnych ei cwmreile i'r dy bech ei na chroch as yn sien. Doshel mi yn unig, as rem mi cawrach y dyn unig gyn dy chor Gael. Ma so, fe mai de gynw bach jyn vol, as gynw brewnus yn aidnig yn chaint dy vol fain llorish grey, si ordwynia sgymol iam na fisgol grey ons blwmin tai benrich, tam mi goel chima gyd as jay dy fainsio dy fel I eriw becha, sa tai leis beis fai gyr sien. Eis fraie a red ege on sach dai de lŵr, as dynch mi de red van jat gys a tai follum. Hai as baggerton as mollachten as al toen en gaid ersen vain dunny ein. Hai mi schiest de een rauw eble dem fedden mach or bies on a chorriege. No de wel I de cage in de wunjes in bij maiege, as limme jane de tame en de rachlid, de wel weg jane der hager de rieuw. Now, whatever these displays of loyalty or affection, executed James Stanley was in Bolton in 1651. And so to return to those words of David Robertson that we started with, after the decollation of James the 7th Earl of Derby for his enthusiastic loyalty to Charles I, his lady, a French woman of princely birth and heroic spirit, and she was Charlotte de Trémoille, 1599 to 1664, and you can read about her in Dr. Jennifer Kiaull Draskow's excellent biography, Lady Derby, the Great Whore of Babylon. His lady sought with her children an asylum in Castle Rushen, and, presuming on the valour of Sir Thomas Armstrong, and here a footnote tells us that he was governor of the castle, the fidelity of Captain Christian, and this was, of course, William Christian of Ronsway, Ilium Dawn, and a footnote tells us that he was commander of the insular forces, and the attachment of the islanders, flattered herself with the hopes of defending it, Castle Rushen that is, against the Republican army. And now the Northern Lights sing a piece from Manx national songs about the Deemster's daughter.
Singing birds are coming, sing.
The Northern Lights, the Deemster's Daughter. The tune was arranged by W. H. Gill from a traditional piece called An Gilliad a Rai, collected from Mrs. T. Kenyoch of Ballackagan, but the words were from an English poet, Charles William Dalman, 1862 to 1938, but there's a thought that he may only have tidied up an existing piece, as he seems to have done with The Fowler and the Blackbird, which is also in Manx National Songs. Now, whatever hopes Charlotte, Countess of Derby might have harboured, we know that just prior to this time the island's militia had gathered one night at Ronaldsway, the home of William Dawn, and sworn an oath to him to withstand her so as to prevent the Countess of Derby bringing ruin to the island and its people by opposing the parliamentarians. David Robertson continues his account. When Colonels Birch and Duckenfield with 10 armed vessels invaded the island, Christian, either possessing less zeal or more prudence than his lady, surrendered this fortress to their first summons, and thereby saved the inhabitants of the isle from bloodshed and misery. Yet, for this generosity, he's been represented by the sycophants of royalty as the betrayer, while in truth he was the preserver of his country. The pride of the Countess of Derby was severely wounded by this event. She was, however, honoured with generosity and respect during her captivity in Castle Rushen. Hwyr mi was for tan ven as orm, ledden fech as ginnel de bollach sy nimmer geege. Hug mi be corersen lord mechion a tachert, ach renne de miele braiach jim feischen mechion nuva mi chiter, as hug orm krel de rauwe ginnis de bollach a chush. Ach, straliam grein ar seo sampler elia, jen chrautje jegge. Son choustai je leeuwer, geel mi je rish. A geert seo ve a vrische maag true dunje gehemer, as verreishis a chadan biljach. Dein meer ten jeli da torm, as rem mi rai gaert no drau alem, drau ik kerel mature senjach. Van agelem seljith maag de wei koei, tre honnek mi a kaart gedden, haisha, rai, chit chies a red, as va kius de gistigen moer a fooi. Van a deinje glennen a beishenok, as va jurgens en edenen, maar de berg shen vai lieltes brioil. And that's a piece by APHEX twin Richard D. James called Logan Witch Rock. And that particular rock, called in Cornish Men on Both, a balance stone, which is a 90-ton granite boulder, sits on a headland in southwest Cornwall near the village of Treen. Stasiwn yn asiwn sien radio fan in y Claare na Gael fysgol ar sgeil mach. Mish, Robert gyda'n carsol o Robert y carslach.
Did the other hear tell of old Bobby Bob?
Rosh ma dod mi berach dyn ren yn sur yn sach rai orw, as lwrt de tarn fer jawsen fain chart, gaw I toiach der bwle chion na'n tolw. Man a raw mi a greme e cart sa tullach, tam I crel de bech e a barwyd yn y cart on siens yn onshalid. Ren yn dyn elia limanws as wule a chion leis bun na chep chromega. Se bwlia aglach e fe, ach fe gyn a raw I cor Gael de, ach ren I greme eschen nis, as ren I striw rischen trwrgin, as e tarn sin hugga as vai mor bech sin noch pishinin. Da fysed na wel mish me fe edrum, as when a fear alien ysnin dania tali. Eg a toiacht ve taastach haus ve kaga. A haus raushin toiacht a horsmach there, as van a tenjeli cormush peri kiaunly, gau I toiacht er illach mach, nim tar mestad, had jinnad spoolje mish, had jinnad dunveris jeem na vegan as na vegan, nim kaga as lie me jarn as weinscher, as kachlein source de vran ladies now higelach jane lid cheden. And now of the Countess of Derby, David Robertson says that the Republican soldiers, remembering her gallant defence of Latham House, admired her heroism. The officers emulated each other in paying just deference to the dignity of her mind and the delicacy of her sex, while the majesty of the English Republic disdained to resent the arrogance of the 7th Earl of Derby by any indignity to his captive widow. On the restoration of Charles II, she returned to England, with the sanguine hopes of recovering the whole of her lord's forfeited estates, and of obtaining ample vengeance on her enemies. But this prodigal and voluptuous monarch was too much engaged in prosecuting his own pleasures to revenge the injuries or reward the sufferings of his friends. Among many others, the Countess of Derby was neglected, which so affected her lofty spirit that with the highest indignation she retired to Knowsley, where she soon after died, bewailing the ingratitude of kings. Brendan Behan was born in 1923 and died just a month past his 41st birthday in 1964. He's known for his staunch Irish republicanism, his writing, of course, and, let's face it, for his drinking, so it's no surprise to hear him singing an old traditional song, Prabs and All.
Is on my sleesh and every as I dine eggs in your PLC as a Jan of store. Is a leas a sweeney as a curate on tail shows come eggs she chinta for you like to fall. Was chinnery ho, joke nori ho, nequer for opinion lat egg dolphin ford. My sinister glory scarred car, Jebe Maratami Jackal, Prabs and all. God bless the captain of the ship that's sailing along the voyage home. Make strong the rigging where the wind is wailing and guide his bows through the foam. And my cara brandy, red wine I shandy, oh may his cargo never sink. Come roar the chorus, there's life before us, while we still put our true trust and drink. Mar Nielsen sailed shore, auction and rie, rod the heater, no slam the hyo. My shirist avri, shin il bert nis kriene, na vemmer tami jechol prabs and all.
Brendan Behan telling us that there's no better advice, no better advice perhaps, than being always, well, bouncing around in the drink, really, perhaps, and all heartily drinking, is what it's usually translated as. Now, Knowsley Hall in South Lancashire came to the Stanley family first through marriage. Sir John Stanley married Isabella Latham in 1385, and when she inherited both Latham and Knowsley from her niece in 1390, being a married woman, her inheritance became the property of her husband. Now, as we've heard, Latham House was destroyed by the vengeful parliamentarians, and the Countess reverted to the Knowsley estate. However, it wasn't just her bewailing the ingratitude of kings. Above the front entrance on the south side of Knowsley Hall is an inscription. James, Earl of Derby, Lord of Man and the Isles, grandson of James, Earl of Derby, and of Charlotte, daughter of Claude, Duc de la Tremoille, whose husband James was beheaded at Bolton, 15th of October 1652, for strenuously adhering to Charles II, who refused a bill passed unanimously by both Houses of Parliament for restoring to the family the estates lost by his loyalty to him, 1732. So it was clearly something that had rankled in the family. Here we are 80 years later, and James, the grandson of Charlotte, was still bewailing the ingratitude of kings and pointing out that Charles II had refused to give power to a bill which had been passed unanimously by both Houses of Parliament, that the Stanleys should be restored to their lost estates. Sé leis doliad fír bhúr de rennad cór leisé gus a tairish, as hugad des deach sa chémar fadit. Va fair Jane Tengeli, hardy, as for mer bristege. Ach, remmi saich I de kaart, as te kaurel de mai. Van de erde ege toiacht leis bagger en jay shultus son adi, as wat cor gelden de jinnach de chulio cherige en lai chitnus orin mar flia. Ach, van a bagger nog mestig leis soort enjach, de lestial nou girach, de rauw en jou courage mau eg fair benrich fes. Doortjad, man a bege en aach de rauw en jaartok erne jou, ons immerke as trogel soes na kistje kan trome gus a gaart, de beg over giere vreok corfo hurde. Huggad mar Aurelius on be castit, a stedok erskine caginus J. Pes, vergit harstu, is kaint John ach de overok, as an audit skammeltach vai bol na tu lelinok, gus bol be son altige sly. A Welsh language activist and actor and singer, Bryn Vaughan, is joined by, I think, Lowry Mererid used to sing with his band. So I think this is Lowry Mererid who's singing with him in this song by the band SOBIN A'R SMAELIAID. And the song is called A Tea, the House.
Ma'n gallu siarad, na sa'n stori werth I chlywad, stori wir heb fawr o gelwydd, stori hen a stori newydd, hanes caled, hanes caru, hanes geni, hanes magi tylwydd dan ei lechi, Mina nawr yn ei bradoch I. Gwerthu lle mag arbed cost ag arbed arian ennill cost o dweud bod rhiwan wel ag nawr does dim alluriaeth wedi gwerthu'n etifeddiaeth rai yn mynd gan weirig trais rai yn derbyn check the size ac ma'n arwydd sy'n deud fod yr hendir a pwy sydd ar pres i'w brynu a ddoriwn ni ei werthu.
Welsh band SOBIN A'R SMAELIAID, led by Bryn Vaughan, and a bittersweet love song, I suppose, about selling a house with all its memories, but who's going to buy it? Could it even be someone from across the border? Van mi tiggle de bollach na fawenoch, as lur glonna len de grog, na beggan the smoon a shen, as cach lesh punt er a law, Rennad beg Jane Sayach, as rennad loo the jinnach at gul knife benrich smedder, lair be, son and tatnus de mi dale, dunya cha blummin mai as a coast crew de yow. A Castle Rushen, says Robertson, still retains an air of royalty. Its Gothic apartments are occupied by the governor, and the barracks by some companies of soldiers, who were seldom permitted to reside much longer than a 12-month in the island, but whose intercourse with the inhabitants of Castletown increases their trade and undoubtedly contributes to render them more polished and affable than their neighbours of Ramsey and Peel. A bit of a sideswipe there at the end. As a sen tashin chit gusjera Claare a chir chaw. Chris Pearson will be along very shortly with the Sunday Chill Out from 7 to 9, and Judith Lay will be here to present Sundown from 9 o'clock through into Monday morning. We close with Scottish trio SIAN again, this time in the company of Skye Gaelectronica band Nightworks. Now, don't forget Ounder and Kiaull Tia Vanning, the Manx Folk Awards. They got underway today. They continue through to this Thursday, the 30th of March, Monday to Wednesday in the Kensington Arts Theatre and across the road in Rosemount Church in Douglas, and on Thursday in the Methodist Hall in St John's for the Manx language recitation classes. As Shanae has Masaw until the next time then, this is Robert Cutting Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Oh, Bobby Bob.
Wishing you a very good night. Eve, I'm a Crieri Olio as Orser Lier, as my Yeri and shared you.